Good morning, everyone. How are you doing today? Oh boy, the music seems kind of loud. Wait, let me turn this down if I can find it. Wow, how did it get so loud? Okay. I hope everyone's doing well today. This morning we are going to read through chapter 5. Chapter 5 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. If this is your first time watching, we are not just reading through each word. We're stopping and we're talking about the definitions of words and the meanings of phrases that we encounter along the way. I learn a lot of new things too, but if you're an advanced learner of English, this is a great way of improving your vocabulary and English comprehension. So if you're watching this live with me, then please make questions, ask questions in the comments section, and if I see them, I will address your questions about phrases or words that you don't understand, or whatever you want. Even if you want to make a comment about what's happening in the story, please do it. It's what we're doing. That's what makes watching this interesting, is that we get to talk about the different words and phrases that we see along the way. And Kai Pan on YouTube says, good morning, Kai. How are you doing today? All right, well, let's get started with Chapter 5 of The Great Gatsby. When I came home to West Egg that night, I was afraid for a moment that my house was on fire. 2 o'clock and the whole corner of the peninsula was blazing with light. And blazing is when there's light coming from a fire. So if you say the fire was blazing, you're saying the fire was giving a lot of light. Sometimes you talk about the sun blazing. And usually that's when the sun is very hot and giving a lot of light. So think about spending the afternoon in the desert. that would be like the blazing sun. So giving a lot of light, giving a lot of heat, a fire with a lot of light. So when he says the whole peninsula was blazing, it could be that there was a fire happening. Well, I guess we'll see in a minute. The whole peninsula was blazing with light, which fell unreal on the shrubbery and made thin, elongated glints upon the roadside wires. Turning a corner, I saw that it was Gatsby's house, lit from tower to cellar. At first I thought it was another party, a wild rout that had resolved itself into hide-and-go-seek. Miriam says, good morning. Hi, Miriam. How are you doing today? At first I thought it was another party, wild rout that had resolved itself into a hide-and-go-seek, or sardines in the box, which shall, with all of the house thrown open to the game. But there wasn't a sound, only wind in the trees which blew the wires and made the lights go off and on again, as if the house had winked. This is winking. Had winked in the darkness. As my taxi groaned away, I saw Gatsby walking toward me across his lawn. Your place looks like the World's Fair, I said. Does it? He turned his eyes toward it absently. I haven't been glancing into some of the rooms. I've been glancing into some of the rooms. Let's go to Coney Island, old sport, in my car. So it wasn't really a fire. It's just that there were so many lights all over the property that it looked like there was a fire. The house was blazing with light. So much light, it was like the sun. It's too late. Well, suppose we take a plunge in the swimming pool. I haven't made use of it all summer. I've got to go to bed. All right. He waited, looked at me with a suppressed eagerness. I talked with Miss Baker, I said this afternoon. I'm going to call up Daisy tomorrow, invite her over here to tea. Oh, that's all right, he said carelessly. I don't want to put you in any trouble. What day would suit you? What day would suit you? He corrected me quickly. I don't want to put you to any trouble, you see. How about the day after tomorrow? He considered it for a moment, then with reluctance, I want to get the grass cut, he said. We both looked at the grass. There was a sharp line where my ragged lawn ended and the darker, well-kept expanse of his began. I suspected that he meant my grass. There's another little thing, he said, uncertainly, and hesitated. Would you rather put it off for a few days? I asked. To put something off is a phrasal verb, which means to delay something. It's very common. So when you put something off, you are delaying it. So do you want to delay the meeting for 2 or 3 days? Do you want to put it off? Put the meeting off? Would you rather put it off for a few days? I asked. Oh, it isn't about that. At least, he fumbled with a series of beginnings. Why, look here, old sport. You don't make much money, do you? Not very much. This seemed to reassure him, and he continued more confidently. I thought you didn't. If you'll pardon you see, I carry on a little business on the side, a sort of sideline, you understand. And I thought if you don't make very much, you are selling bonds, aren't you, old sport? Trying to. Well, this would interest you. It wouldn't take up much of your time, and you might pick up a nice bit of money. It happens to be a rather confidential sort of thing. Confidential means secret. Don't tell anyone. I realize now that under different circumstances, this conversation might have been one of the crises of my life. But because the offer was obviously tactlessly for a service to be rendered, I had no choice except to cut him off there. I've got my hands full. Miriam says, selling bonds. Bonds are like certificates. I don't really know too much about finance, but they're like certificates that you buy that in the future will be worth more. Usually governments sell bonds to people. So people, it's like investing in the government. You buy the certificate from the government, and they promise that in 5 or 10 years they'll pay you. They'll return the money that you bought plus 10%. Let's see, what is the official definition of a bond? I'm sure that my definition is horrible. What is a bond in simple terms? Bonds are issued by governments and corporations when they want to raise money. By buying a bond, you're giving the issuer a loan, and they agree to pay you back the face value of the loan on a specific date, and to pay you periodic interest payments along the way, usually twice a year. I didn't know that corporations also did bonds. I thought it was just the government. So he tries to sell these certificates to people. Here, buy this for $100, and in 5 years it'll be worth $120. Something like that. I've got my hands full, I said. I'm much obliged, but I couldn't take on any more work. You wouldn't have to do any business with Wolsheim. Evidently, he thought that I was shying away. To shy away from something is to go away from it kind of slowly. I don't know. I don't really want to do that. That's shying away from something. From the connection mentioned at lunch, but I assured him he was wrong. He waited a moment longer, hoping I'd begin a conversation, but I was too absorbed to be responsive, so he went unwillingly home. The evening had made me light-headed and happy. I think I walked into a deep sleep as I entered my front door. So I didn't know whether or not Gatsby went to Coney Island, or how many hours he glanced into rooms while his house blazed gaudily on. I called up Daisy from the office next morning and invited her to come to tea. Don't bring Tom, I warned her. What? Don't bring Tom. "Who is Tom?" she asked innocently. The day agreed upon was pouring rain. At 11 o'clock, a man in a raincoat dragging a lawnmower tapped at my front door and said that Mr. Gatsby had sent him over to cut my grass. This reminded me that I had forgotten to tell my Finn to come back, so I drove into West Egg Village to search for her among the soggy white-washed alleys and buy some cups and lemons and flowers. The flowers were unnecessary, for at 2 o'clock a greenhouse arrived from Gatsby's with innumerable receptacles to contain it. An hour later the front door opened nervously, and Gatsby, in a white flannel suit, silver shirt, and gold-colored tie, hurried in. How can you have a silver shirt? He was pale, and there were dark signs of sleeplessness beneath his eyes. "Is everything all right?" he asked immediately. "The grass looks fine, if that's what you mean." "What grass?" he inquired blankly. "Oh, the grass in the yard. Oh." He looked out the window at it, but judging from his expression, I don't believe he saw a thing. "Looks very good," he remarked vaguely. "One of the papers said they thought the rain would stop about 4. I think it was the Journal. Have you got everything you need in the shape of tea?" I took him into the pantry, where he looked a little reproachfully at Finn. To reproach something is to disapprove of something. So his cleaning lady, an old Finnish woman, I guess he just calls her Finn, he doesn't like her, so he looks at her like he didn't approve of her being there. Together we scrutinized the 12 lemon cakes from the delicatessen shop. "Will they do?" Of course, they're fine," he added hollowly, "old sport." The rain cooled about 3:30 to a damp mist through which occasional thin drops swam like dew. Gatsby looked with vacant eyes through a copy of Clay's Economics, starting at the finished tread that shook the kitchen floor and peering toward the bleared windows from time to time, as if a series of invisible but alarming happenings were taking place outside. Finally, he got up and informed me in an uncertain voice that he was going home. "Why is that?" "Nobody's coming to tea. It's too late." He looked at his watch, as if there was some pressing demand on his time elsewhere. "I can't wait all day." "Don't be silly. It's just 2 minutes to 4. He sat down miserably, as if I had pushed him, and simultaneously there was a sound of a motor turning into my lane. We both jumped up. And a little harrowed myself, I went into the yard. Let's take a look at that word harrow. Cause distress. So he was a little harrowed, meaning he felt a little bit of distress himself. Under the dripping bare lilac trees, a large open car was coming up the drive. I stopped. Daisy's face tipped sideways beneath a 3-cornered lavender hat, looked out at me with a bright, ecstatic smile. "Is this absolutely where you live, my dearest one?" The exhilarating ripple of her voice was a wild tonic in the rain. I had to follow the sound of it for a moment, up and down, with my ear alone before any words came through. A damp streak of hair lay like a dash of blue paint across her cheek, and her hand was wet with glistening drops as I took it to help her from the car. "Are you in love with me?" she said in my ear. Or why did I have to come alone?" Anne is asking about ripple. Let me show you a picture of a ripple. Let's see. If you imagine you throw something like a stone into the water, and then, so you throw something into the water, and then you see these circles moving out. These are ripples. So a ripple of hair, a strand is just a streak of hair. Miriam's asking about a streak of hair. I think they're related though. Ripple and streak, I think, are in the same sentence. We'll go back and read in a minute. But a streak is like a line. But if it's a ripple, then it would be kind of like the movement of water, because ripple is this sort of wavy movement of water. These are ripples. Let's see. Where did that go? A lot of times, if you like ice cream, I love ice cream. I haven't had ice cream in a very long time. A lot of times when you're having ice cream, the name of the ice cream will be something ripple. Like maybe strawberry ripple or raspberry ripple. And then what you can imagine is that you see this sort of wave of something. Chocolate ripple, caramel ripple. So it's a pretty common word, actually, ripple. And that's what you can imagine when you see the word ripple. All right. So let's go back and see where they use the word. We might look at a picture. Well, let's look at a streak first. Streak. A streak is just a line, but kind of an uneven line. Like these. These are good examples of streaks. So can you imagine, like, if you're cleaning a window or a mirror, you have to be very careful about how you do it, because if you don't do it properly, you'll leave streaks, lines. Those are the kind of things that we call streaks. These are all streaks. So you can imagine a streak of hair. It's raining, so the hair is heavy, and it goes down like this. That's a streak of hair. Okay, so let's go back and read that paragraph. The exhilarating ripple of her voice was a wild tonic in the rain. So this is ripple being used in a more abstract way. So the sound wave of her voice in the rain was very impressive to him somehow. I had to follow the sound of it for a moment, up and down, with my ear, alone before any words came through. A damp streak of hair lay like a dash of blue paint across her cheek. So there's a streak of hair across her cheek. Why is it blue? I don't know. And her hand was wet with glistening drops as I took it to help her from the car. "Are you in love with me?" she said, low in my ear, "or why did I have to come alone?" "There's the secret of Castle Rackrent. Tell your chauffeur to go far away and spend an hour." "Come back in an hour, Ferdy." Then in a grave murmur, "His name is Ferdy." "Does the gasoline affect his nose?" "I don't think so," she said innocently. "Why?" We went in. To my overwhelming surprise, the living room was deserted. "Well, that's funny," I exclaimed. "What's funny?" She turned her head as there was a light, dignified knocking at the front door. I went out and opened it. Gatsby, pale as death, with hands plunged like weights into his coat pockets, was standing in a puddle of water, glaring tragically into my eyes. With his hands still in his coat pockets, he walked by me into the hall, turned sharply, as if he were on a wire, and disappeared into the living room. It wasn't a bit funny. Aware of the loud beating of my own heart, I pulled the door to against... Wait, what? Aware of the loud beating of my own heart, I pulled the door to against... The increasing rain. That sentence doesn't make any sense to me. For half a minute, there wasn't a sound. Then part of the living room I heard a sort of choking murmur and part of a laugh, followed by Daisy's voice on a clear, artificial note. I certainly am awfully glad to see you again. Miriam says, I think Gatsby is soaked in water. Yeah, I think he is, but it's just that that's a very strange sentence. I think what happened was, I'm not sure yet, but it seems like either he got scared and ran away and then decided to come back, or he doesn't want to make this look arranged, so he's just pretending to suddenly appear. I'm not sure which. Maybe we'll find out in a minute. A pause. It endured horribly. I had nothing to do in the hall, so I went into the room. Gatsby, his hands still in his pockets, was reclining against the mantelpiece, in a strange counterfeit of perfect ease, even of boredom. His head leaned back so far that it rested against the face of a defunct mantelpiece clock. And from this position, his distraught eyes stared down at Daisy, who was sitting frightened but graceful on the edge of a stiff chair. We've met before, muttered Gatsby. His eyes glanced momentarily at me and his lips parted with an abortive attempt at a laugh. Anne is asking about reclining. I don't even remember the word reclining. Can you believe that I read these things and then I don't remember them, even though it was a minute ago. Let's see. Reclining, let's read the sentence. It says, Gatsby, his hands still in his pocket, was reclining against the mantelpiece. Reclining means to move back. So, you should... Uh-oh, I've gone blurry. Oh, wait, let me fix my camera. Just a second. Oh, here we go. Okay. Well, I might as well log in. All right. So usually you should be standing or sitting like this, very, very straight up and down. But if you move back like that, that's reclining. And as a matter of fact, maybe you've seen a chair like this. This is a reclining chair or a recliner because you can move back in it. That's a recliner. So it's a pretty common chair type. So here it kind of means leaning. I don't know if you know that word, leaning, like giving all your weight. So he's not standing straight up and down. He's leaning against the fireplace. And N is asking about counterfeit. Counterfeit means fake, not authentic. So if he was reclining against the mantelpiece in a strained counterfeit of perfect ease, that means he was pretending to be comfortable, but he wasn't really comfortable. He was obviously not comfortable, but he was pretending to be comfortable. So imagine the situation. He's in love with this girl who's already married, and he hasn't seen her in many years, and he's trying to act natural. So that's not going to work, right? So he's reclining, trying to look relaxed, leaning against the wall, trying to look comfortable, but he's not comfortable. He probably looks very nervous. His head leaned back, his head leaned back so far that it rested against the face of a defunct mantelpiece clock. Defunct means it doesn't work anymore. It's not working anymore. And from this position, his distraught, that means like worried eyes, stared down at Daisy, who was sitting stiffened, frightened, but graceful on the edge of a stiff chair. We've met before, muttered Gatsby. His eyes glanced momentarily at me, and his lips parted with an abortive attempt at a laugh. Luckily, the clock took this moment to tilt dangerously at the pressure of his head. whereupon he turned and caught it with the trembling fingers and set it back in place. Then he sat down rigidly, his elbow on the arm of the sofa, and his chin in his hand. "I'm sorry about the clock," he said. My own face had now assumed a deep, tropical burn. I couldn't muster up a single commonplace out of 1,000 in my head. "It's an old clock," I told them idiotically. Oh, N is asking about whereupon. That's not really a word that you have to worry about using in spoken English. It would be strange, I think, if you went around saying the word whereupon. You could, but probably not. It just kind of means after that happened, or when this happened, that happened. So let's see. Luckily, the clock took this moment to tilt so Gatsby's standing like this and his head is touching an old clock that doesn't work, but he moved his head too much and then the clock was about to fall over. So let's pretend whereupon means when he turned and caught it with trembling fingers and set it back into place. So he went like this and the clock almost fell over, and when the clock was falling he turned around and put it in the correct position again. But that's really just a literary word. It's not a word that people will use when they're talking to each other, mostly. You could, if you wanted to. It's a word, you could use it, but it sounds a little bit strange in regular conversation. "It's an old clock," I told them idiotically. I think we all believed for a moment that it had smashed into pieces on the floor. "We haven't met for many years," said Daisy, her voice as matter-of-fact as it could ever be. 5 years next November." The automatic quality of Gatsby's answer set us all back at least another minute. I had them both on their feet, with the desperate suggestion that they help me make tea in the kitchen when the demoniac, let's take a look at this for a minute. Demoniac. I guess it just, because, it seems like the word demonic, which means in the way of a demon, in the manner of a demon. And so does demoniac. So I guess maybe it's an older form of demonic. I think in modern English you would just say demonic, but here they're using demoniac. Unless, let's see, are there more definitions? Yeah, and it seems like I'm just looking at a graph showing the use of this word. It drops. Let's see if you can see it here. It seems like it stopped being used after around 1900. So this was written in the 1920s. It wasn't even a common word when the book was written. But it seems like it's getting more popular around this time. Oh well. Similar to a demon, that's what it means. But it's not something I would encourage you to use. So Nick is suggesting that they make tea to kind of kill the tension. There's a lot of weird tension in the room because this is Davy and Gatsby meeting for the first time after several years, and so much has happened in between, and it's a very awkward situation. And so Nick says, "Okay, let's go make some tea." But just as he does that, the Finnish lady, the servant, comes from the kitchen with tea, and he's like, "You." That's why he's calling her demoniac, because she ruined his plan to break the tension, and now they have to still be in this room with this tension. Amid the welcome confusion of cups and cakes and certain physical decency established itself, Gatsby got himself into a shadow, and while Daisy and I talked, looked conscientiously from one to the other of us with tense, unhappy eyes. However, as calmness wasn't an end in itself, I made an excuse at the first possible moment to get to my feet. "Where are you going?" demanded Gatsby in immediate alarm. "I'll be back." "I've got to speak to you about something before you go." He followed me wildly into the kitchen, closed the door, and whispered, "Oh, God," in a miserable way. "What's the matter? This is a terrible mistake," he said, shaking his head from side to side. "A terrible, terrible mistake." "Now, you're just embarrassed, that's all. And luckily," I added, "Daisy's embarrassed too." "She's embarrassed?" he repeated incredulously. Remember, incredulous means I can't believe it. "She's embarrassed? I don't believe you." "Just as much as you are." "Don't talk so loud." "You're acting like a little boy," I broke out impatiently. "Not only that, but you're rude. Daisy's sitting there all alone." He raised his hands to stop my words, looked at me with an unforgettable reproach. Remember, approach means I don't approve. And opening the door, cautiously went back into the other room. I walked out the back way, just as Gatsby had when he had made his nervous circuit of the house half an hour before, and ran for a huge black knotted tree whose massed leaves made a fabric against the rain. Once more, it was pouring, and my irregular lawn, well shaved by Gatsby's gardener, abounded in small muddy swamps and prehistoric marshes. There was nothing to look at from under the tree except Gatsby's enormous house. So I stared at it, like Kant at his church steeple, for half an hour. A brewer had built it early in the period craze. Wait, what? I stared at it like Kant at his church steeple for half an hour. A brewer had built it in the period craze a decade before, and there was a story that he had agreed to pay for 5 years taxes on all the neighboring cottages if the owners would have their roofs thatched with straw. Miriam is asking about the word abound. That means it's everywhere. So, let's see. If you go to New York, tall buildings abound. That means tall buildings are everywhere. Or, I live near Mexico City, which is people everywhere. So many people everywhere in the street, everywhere. You can say, in Mexico City, people abound. Or the Volkswagen here is a very popular car. The Volkswagen Beetle, the old one, the really old one. Or it used to be, I think that's changed, but that used to be like a symbol of the city. So you could say, in Mexico City, the Volkswagen Beetle abounds. It means it's everywhere. You see it everywhere. So what, I don't even remember that word. Let's see. Once more it was pouring, and my irregular lawn, well shaved by Gatsby's gardener, abounded in small muddy swamps. So that means that the gardener had just manicured the lawn to make it look nice for when Daisy arrived. But this exposed many places where there was like little lakes of water, little swamps of water, were everywhere. They abounded. Perhaps their refusal took the heart out of his plan to found a family. He went into an immediate decline. His children sold his house with the black wreath still on the door. Americans, while occasionally willing to be serfs, have always been obstinate about being peasantry. After half an hour, the sun shone again, and the grocer's automobile rounded Gatsby's drive with the raw material for his servant's dinner. I felt sure he wouldn't eat a spoonful. A maid began opening the upper windows of his house, appeared momentarily in each, and leaning from a large central bay, spat meditatively into the garden. It was time I went back. While the rain continued, it had seemed like the murmur of their voices, rising and swelling a little, now and then. I think that's now and then. I think that's a typo. With gusts of emotion. But in the new silence, I felt that silence had fallen within the house too. I went in. After making every possible noise in the kitchen, short of pushing over the stove. But I don't believe they heard a sound. Kaipan says, I think I don't understand the last couple of sentences. Okay, well, no, so Nick is standing in his own yard because Gatsby and Daisy are in his house doing who knows what. And he wants to give them some privacy, so he has nowhere to go. And he's standing outside in the back of his house. And there's nothing for him to do except stand under a tree because it's kind of raining. So he's standing under a tree looking at Gatsby's enormous house next to him. So he's just looking at the activity happening over at Gatsby's house. It says, after half an hour, I'm going to start here. I don't know if the confusion started before this, but let's read starting with after half an hour. After half an hour, the sun shone again, and the grocer's automobile rounded the Gatsby Drive. The grocer, you know what a grocery store is? That's where you buy food that's where you buy ingredients for making the things that you eat. So the grocer's automobile was coming up to Gatsby's house. The grocery store was making a delivery to Gatsby's house with the raw material for his servant's dinner. Raw material is, maybe you like chicken, but you don't just like chicken, you like it to be made in a special way with different spices and seasonings and things that go with it, like, I don't know, potatoes or some vegetables. So the raw material would be the things, all of the ingredients. Let's just say that raw material means ingredients. With the ingredients for his servant's dinner. I felt sure he wouldn't eat a spoonful. So maybe this was supposed to be the ingredients for Gatsby's dinner. But Nick was thinking, oh, Gatsby's not going to eat any food tonight. He's too nervous. There are too many crazy things happening. So that's why he's calling it the servant's dinner. And that's why he's saying, I felt sure he wouldn't eat. Miriam is asking about a gust of wind. Is that before or after what I'm reading? Because where was the gust of wind? Okay, wait, let me read this paragraph and then try to find gust of wind. All right. So a maid began... So Nick is watching the house, and a maid is starting to open the windows to let in the fresh air. And leaning from a large central bay, spat meditatively into the garden. All right, so we have the verb to spit. That's spitting. Spit, spat, spat. It's an irregular verb. And so if she spat meditatively, that means she's standing there thinking about something, and she spit while she was doing it. Who knows what she was thinking about. Spat meditatively into the garden. It was time I went back. While the rain continued, it had seemed like the murmur of voices, rising and swelling a little. Murmuring of voices, if you can hear people talking, but you can't understand the words because it's too quiet or they're too far away, it sounds like you don't really understand the words, you could use the word murmuring. So he heard people talking, but he couldn't understand the words. It was too far away or too quiet. So he's calling it murmuring. And let's see. The murmur of their voices rising and swelling. Swelling means becoming louder, bigger. Now and then, with gusts of emotion. Okay, now I see the word gust. Gust is like the blowing of the wind. That's a gust of wind. But gusts of emotion would be 1 minute, ha 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 ha. Or, because if you're hearing murmuring, you don't know what people are saying, but maybe you could hear the emotions. Maybe 1 minute it's laughing and happiness. Maybe 1 minute it's serious. You don't know what they're saying, but you can receive the gusts of emotion just like you receive a gust of wind. I hope that makes sense. Gust is like blowing. But in the new silence, I felt that the silence had fallen within the house too. Okay, so does that paragraph make more sense now? Is that pretty clear what that means? If you still have a question about one of the words or what's happening, let me know. Okay, I went in after making every possible noise in the kitchen short of pushing over the stove. But I don't believe they heard a sound. They were sitting at either end of the couch, looking at each other as if some question had been asked or was in the air, and every vestige of embarrassment was gone. Daisy's face was smeared with tears. And when I came in, she jumped up and began wiping at it with her handkerchief, before a mirror. But there was a change in Gatsby that was simply confounding. He literally glowed. Without a word or gesture of exultation, a new well-being radiated from him and filled the room. "Oh, hello, old sport," he said, as if he hadn't seen me for years. I thought for a moment he was going to shake hands. "It stopped raining, has it?" "Has it?" When he realized what I was talking about, that there were twinkle bells of sunshine in the room, he smiled like a weatherman, like an ecstatic patron of recurrent light, and repeated the news to Daisy. "What do you think of that? It stopped raining." "I'm glad, Jay," her throat full of aching, grieving beauty, told only of her unexpected joy. "I want you and Daisy to come over to my house," he said. "I'd like to show her around." "You sure you want me to come?" "Absolutely, old sport." Daisy went upstairs to wash her face. Too late, I thought, with humiliation of my towels, while Gatsby and I waited on my lawn. "My house looks well, doesn't it?" he demanded. "See how the whole front of it catches the light?" I agreed that it was splendid. "Yes." His eyes went over it, every arched door and square tower. "It took me just 3 years to earn the money that bought that." "I thought you inherited your money." "I did, old sport," he said automatically, "but I lost most of it in the big panic, the panic of the war." I think he hardly knew what he was saying, for when I asked him what business he was in, he answered, "That's my affair," before he realized that it wasn't the appropriate reply. "Oh, I've been doing several things," he corrected himself. "I was in the drug business, and then I was in the oil business, but I'm not in either now." He looked at me with more attention. "Do you mean you've been thinking over what I proposed the other night?" Before I could answer, Daisy came out of the house, and 2 rows of brass buttons on her dress gleamed in the sunlight. "That huge place there?" she cried, pointing. "Do you like it?" "I love it, but I don't see how you can live there all alone." "I keep it always full of interesting people, night and day. People who do interesting things. Celebrated people." Instead of taking the shortcut along the Sound, we went down the road and entered by the big postern. What's a postern? A back door or gate, private or side entranceway. With enchanting murmurs, Daisy admired this aspect of the feudal silhouette against the sky, admired the gardens, the sparkling odor of jonquils and the frothy odor of hawthorn and plum blossoms, and the pale gold odor of Kiss Me at the Gate. So again, they keep using this word murmur. It means, I don't know what she was saying, I could just hear that she was happy. Maybe he was too far away. Maybe she was speaking too quietly. But he could just hear sounds that maybe sounded like words but weren't really. It was strange to reach the marble steps and find no stir of bright dresses in and out the door, and hear no sound but bird voices in the trees. And inside, as we wandered through the Marie Antoinette music rooms and restoration salons, I felt that there were guests concealed behind every couch and table, under orders to be breathlessly silent until we had passed through. As Gatsby closed the door of the Merton College library, I could have sworn I heard the old owl-eyed man break into ghostly laughter.